I'll do a real quick go around on who's selling what. And you guys can start right here.
Are you ready? I'm Lee Keuchel. My book is Perseverance. It's about my father's life. He was a Holocaust survivor who made his way to Squirrel Hill in late 1950, and eventually he and my mother opened up a jewelry store in Squirrel Hill, Darlington and Murray Avenue, and it's all in the book. And my book is being adapted into a play for Prime Stage Theater for next April.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And our Squirrel Hill books are back here.
And we also have calendar.
And the calendar, Squirrel Hill calendar. And then Todd.
Hi, I'm the author or co-author of Images of America, Pittsburgh's Bridges, and then I also do a bridge calendar every year as well.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Laura Morton-Scheinman. I'm co-author of the book Ott and Pittsburgh's Family That Built Pittsburgh's Famed Department Store. It's published by Pitt Press, and we're just very pleased that it's out. So.
I'm Jim Wodarczyk, and first book is the Allegheny Arsenal Handbook. It's a fundraiser for the Lawrenceville Historical Society. And I also have a few other books that I wrote. One is the Goddess of Grain story of the Iron Sea Brewing Company, and the new book, Images of America, Orphans and Orphanages of Pittsburgh, and also a collection of stories from Allegheny Cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you. And you can be, after the meeting, they'll be here, and you still can buy more books. Okay, introduction of our board members. Myself, I'm Jim Hammond, one of the co-presidents. And then we got Wayne Bossinger here. He's the other co-president. Our vice president, editor, and researcher, Helen, she's not here tonight due to some COVID problems. Our program coordinators, Todd Miller, he's here, and Toby Chapman over there. Our membership coordinator, Stanley Klein, and he's out also. Email researcher, that's Tony Inavita. He's also has a little COVID problem, so they're out for the evening. Our treasurer, Evelyn Young, in the back, watches all of our money. Our media specialist is normally Audrey Glickman, and we have, I forgot.
Adam.
Adam is filling in tonight, and I'm glad he's here. And Jean Binstock, she's not here, she generally works in the back table. Charles Sukop, right?
Sucker.
So he's our, one of our new board members and also a researcher. And Todd Wilson back here, it's Helen's son, he's our newest board member and a researcher. And we'd love to have these younger people come to kind of replace us old guys. And they already have some plans and some new things to do with and projects for Squirrel Hill, so that'll be great. Okay, our membership drive is going pretty well. We encourage gifts of membership to give them to family and relatives and friends, and especially people who have moved away from Squirrel Hill. It's nice to, if they have a membership, then they can read our newsletter and kind of keep up to date with what's going on. I'd like to shout out to Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition and the Squirrel Hill branch of the Carnegie Library. They have 50 years of service in our area. Helen has put a new bulletin board up down at the library also, if anybody goes down the library. Tony's not here, but basically the Neil Log House, they have raised $10,000 in that it was a corner house event, and we made a little donation from our Squirrel Hill Historical Society to take them over the top. Okay, and then Toby is going to give us Todd is going to give us an update on programs. Too many people here. Okay, Todd, sorry.
All right, thanks, Jim. Good evening, everyone. In addition to tonight's program, we have some excellent programs slated for calendar year 2023. In September, jumping ahead, Laura Schneiderman and her co-author Mary Lynn Pitts will be here to talk about the Kaufman family and their book. Then to start off the year, we'll have on January 10th, Squirrel Hill by the Numbers. David Rotenstein, a local historian, will talk about the Jewish number syndicate in Squirrel Hill during the 1930s. And then on February 14th, Valentine's Day, you can bring your loved ones here to hear Lizzie Barker, the executive director of the Frick, who will talk about the history of the institution as well as its present and future. And then on March 14th, Todd Wilson, who's in the back, as you know, he'll talk about the history of bridges over Fern Hollow, a most timely topic. So we have you can check our website for the full slate of programs, and we'll look forward to seeing you throughout the year in 2023. So at this time, it's my pleasure to turn the program back to Jim.
Thank you. As you can see, they keep really busy on keeping our programs interesting. Evelyn is going to introduce the program tonight.
Thanks, Joe. Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to see you all be braving the cold to be out here today. I want to say that I met Lydia Ott about a year ago when she was giving a talk at the Cathedral Learning about Chinatown, and she graciously accepted my invitation to come and talk for us tonight, so thank you very much. As well as her grandmother, her Nai, which we call her paternal grandmother, and her namesake. Lydia Ott is a graduate student at the University of Pittsburgh studying occupational therapy. She is fourth-generation Chinese American whose family has lived in Pittsburgh for over 100 years. She grew up in Wexford area and now currently is a Squirrel Hill resident. A shout out to you for that. It is no surprise to me Lydia is following the footsteps of her grandparents in the medical field. Her grandfather, Bill Ott, was a dentist here in Pittsburgh. And I've been to his office when my friend Stuart Ho was practicing there as a dentist, and that's a long time ago. And Lydia, her grandmother, her namesake, is a retired Pittsburgh nurse. While Lydia is not in school, she is actively practicing at her local church, the Pittsburgh Chinese Church at the North Side, or the North Hill, excuse me. She hopes one day to take occupational therapy abroad, serving local impoverished community. In addition, during the COVID pandemic, as hate crime against Chinese Americans increased exponentially across the United States, it pushed Lydia to dig deeper into her family's past. She has been blessed to have multiple opportunities to share her family history and the history of Pittsburgh Chinatown through a documentary, panel presentation, and orientation to hundreds of people near and far. Please welcome Lydia Ott and her Nai, Lydia Ott.
Okay, well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming out to the Squirrel Hill Historical Society. It is such an honor to be asked to be a speaker here at your society, and I just really want to thank Evelyn. Thank you so much for thinking of me, asking me to come, and Todd as well for organizing so many things to get us to be here today. So we have a lot to present, so I'm going to get moving, and we're going to save all questions for the end. But we are so happy and so thrilled to be here, so thank you so much. All right, so I'm just going to go through a rundown of what's going to happen tonight for our program. First, we're just going to do a little bit more self-introduction, then I'll go through a brief history of Chinese in America, and then a little bit more about Pittsburgh's Chinatown. And then we will hear from my grandma. I actually call her Yin Yin, which is a more village peasant way of calling your grandma, but I call her Yin Yin, and we'll hear from her about her experience living in Chinatown. And then we will watch the documentary that I was so fortunate to be able to make with the University of Pittsburgh this last year. And then we'll talk about the fact that Chinatown is not here in Pittsburgh anymore, and what does that mean for us today. And then we'll have a brief Q&A session at the end. So, this is me. This is me actually with the historical landmark placard that was put up in April of this year. Pittsburgh has finally been recognized as having a Chinatown, whereas we hadn't before April 2022. So again, I am a student at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm studying occupational therapy, which basically helps you from anything you want to do, whether that's brushing your teeth, changing your clothes, going to the grocery store, driving your car. OTs do it all, and I love OT, but I'm not here to talk about OT today. Next, I just want to introduce my grandma, if you want to come up and introduce yourself. And maybe for clarity purposes, in my family we call myself, I'm usually called Liddy, and we'll call her Lydia, so it'll make it a little clearer and easier for everyone tonight.
We use a lot of English, even though we are Chinese speaking. I'm very proud to be a grandmother and also great-grandmother, and Liddy was named after me, and I'm very grateful for that.
Okay, so next we're just going to talk a little bit about our family. So this is a picture of my family. My Yin Yin had 4 boys, and I'm the daughter, come from the 3rd son of my Yin Yin, so he's here on the right. And I have 3 sisters. I'm the middle sister, and my younger sister is right here. This is Abby, and my brother-in-law, Phil. And like Evelyn said, we are actually a 2nd generation of Pittsburgh dentists. My yaya, which was my Yin Yin's husband, was a dentist in the North Hills, and then my dad actually took on our dental practice. So if you have any trouble with your teeth, please come visit us in the North Hills. I work there, Abby works there, my cousin works there on occasion, so you might find us there. And this is a picture of my extended family with all 3 brothers. 1 brother has passed away already. But this was actually us on a trip to China in our village. My grandma was born in America, but her parents, my great-grandparents, were born here in this village. And this is us in 2019, right before the pandemic hit, of us being able to see our village. And like Evelyn said, my Yin Yin and I spent a lot of time at church. I'm involved in the youth group, I'm on the missions committee, we do worship sometimes, and this is just a picture of our English congregation. We also have a Chinese congregation, a Chinese speaking congregation that meets, we're one church, and so this is our body. So let's jump right in. Let's talk about some of the history of Chinese in America. So this is a really, really brief and succinct timeline of Chinese in America. I think the point of talking about this is why did the Chinese come to America? What were they looking for? Where did they come from? Where in America did they come? So basically it really started with the California Gold Rush, which started in 1848. And then out of that, actually, the first Chinatown in America was built in San Francisco in 1850, which then led to the Transcontinental Railroad that brought even more laborers and workers from China into America. And then, as we see with this time, almost 30 years-ish, we see the Chinese Exclusion Act passed in America. So I'm going to jump into some details about that, but first, who were the people who were coming from China? So it wasn't all of China that was coming to America. It was a very small and specific region. So the big picture, the big map up here is actually the province of Guangdong. And this red part right in there is actually like the Toisan region within the Guangdong province of China. And as you can see, it's at the very southern tip of what people like to call the rooster, because China kind of looks a little bit like a rooster. So we're right at the bottom there. So this is hopefully a little bit of a clearer map for you to see. This is the region again of Toisan, but I just want to point out how close it is to Macau and Hong Kong. And if you can see, there's actually, I should have brought a pointer, there's a little river that runs right through here and down into the ocean, which made it really easy for Toisan people to leave their village and find opportunities and work elsewhere. So a lot of them were able to leave and go to Hong Kong or Australia or Singapore or Malaysia or America, which is what happened to my family and a lot of Chinese families at that time. And that's exactly where our village is. So we're really, really close to the river. That's where my family's from. So let's talk a little bit about the California Gold Rush, which started in 1848. This was not just a phenomenon in California. This was not just a phenomenon in America. This was news worldwide, and people in Chinese villages were hearing that there was gold in America. And so you can imagine what happened. People were like, there's gold and it's free for the taking? I have to get there, right? So these people, the Chinese people, started coming in waves to America, and they actually call America Gamsan, which means Gold Mountain in Toisan. So they call America Gold Mountain in hopes of making it rich, in hopes of having better opportunities, in hopes of getting out of their village. So they started coming around 1848, right when the gold was discovered, and in about 1850, we actually see that a law was passed, the Foreign Miners License Law, that all non-US citizens were going to have to pay a $20 a month fee in order to mine in America. Now keep in mind, this is 1850. So $20 is a huge fine that you're paying every single month in order to maybe find gold and maybe make it rich. And that made it really, really hard for the Chinese to stay in America. And so what ended up happening was a lot of them moved out of the mining areas and they started their own Chinatown in San Francisco. And that was the first Chinatown in 1850 that was made in America. And it was, this tax was later repealed to be $4 a month, which is still a lot of money. But basically it pushed a lot of the Chinese away from mining. And then in about 1852, this was the height of the gold rush, and about 20,000 of the 67,000 people coming to America were from China. So next, the next biggest event in Chinese American history was the Transcontinental Railroad. This has also brought a whole lot of Chinese over to America. And this started in 1864, and it happened because Congress had put an act onto the Central Pacific Railroad that they had a timeline. Basically, the Transcontinental Railroad was uniting the East Coast and the West Coast. And the Central Pacific Railroad only had a certain amount of time so that two companies were meeting in the middle. And the Central Pacific Railroad was like, we're not going to make it. We need more laborers. And so as an experiment, the Central Pacific Railroad decided to hire 50 Chinese workers. And what happened was they worked really hard and they did a really good job, and the railroad company said, this is great, they're hardworking, they're quick, they're cheap, let's hire more. And so by the end of the building of the railroad, there were 11,000 Chinese people employed. They made up 90% of the workforce for this railroad. But it wasn't easy for the Chinese. You can see some of the statistics on the board, but they were working 12-hour shifts, day and night. They were not provided food, they were not provided clothing, they were not provided shelter, and this was exclusively for the Chinese. The white railroad workers were given allocations and benefits for those things, but the Chinese were not. And so they made the Chinese do the really hard things, like blowing up the side of the mountain, and a lot of them died in the explosions that were paving through those mountains to get through. They were dying in avalanches and rock slides. It just wasn't an easy job for anyone, but the Chinese had it very, very hard, and they were making up 90% of the workforce. But one thing I just want to point out is that the Chinese were able to lay down 10 miles of track in one day, which is crazy. And this is a current record. No one can beat the Chinese, even to this day. Not that we're making railroads so much anymore, but this is a current world record, and no one can beat them. So, about 30 years later, as the Chinese are coming to America, there's so much discrimination, so much xenophobia, so many things that are rising up and changing the dynamics of America. And so basically in May 6, 1882, there was a law passed that there was a 10-year ban on Chinese laborers to come into America. And it's really significant because it's the first and only law that has discriminated against people of a certain country coming to America. So it gets even worse, as you can see on the screen. They passed the Gerry Act in 1892, which puts a permanent ban on Chinese from coming to America, except for merchants, diplomats, tourists, students, and returning laborers. And my family actually came during that time, pretty smart. They decided to declare themselves as merchants. It is on our papers that my great-grandfather declared himself as a merchant and was able to come into America even though the Chinese Exclusion Act was happening. So next, the big movement we see in this is in about 1943, which is about the start of World War II. And so Japan started poking fun at America and said, you and China are allies, but how can that be if you have an exclusion act for all of the people from your country coming to America? I don't think you guys are really allies. And so the United States said, oh, no, we're friends. We're going to allow 105 people to enter our country each year. And that was it. And they were like, okay. So, I mean, there were small changes, but it really didn't happen until the Immigration Act of 1965 that opened for a few more people to come in, and then in 1990 it really opened the window for not just Chinese immigrants, but immigrants from around the world to be able to come into America. Okay, so I haven't even started talking about Pittsburgh yet. How does this relate to Pittsburgh? So, everything that was happening up until this point was happening in California or the West Coast. None of this was really happening on the East Coast, just primarily because of geography. It's hard for Chinese people to move from China to America and then go all the way across America to get to Pennsylvania or New York or Virginia, anywhere. And so the first records that we actually see is this Beaver Falls cutlery factory. So in 1872, it's recorded that the Chinese entered the Beaver Falls region from California and New Orleans because there was a strike between the white laborers in the factory. And the white laborers said, we're not doing it anymore, we're not working here. And so John Reeves, who was the director and owner of the factory, said, okay, you don't want to work, I'll hire someone else. And so he hires the Chinese. He had word from, as it's recorded, a missionary who said that the Chinese are hard workers and don't drink. And so he was like, okay, I'll take my risk. And he hired 225 workers for a 5-year contract. But it wasn't easy for the Chinese to move that far, and it wasn't easy for them to be in a region that is primarily white. And so there were a lot of actually hate crimes recorded and just really awful things done to the Chinese, that they were pushed on the sidewalk, a lot of them were killed. And when they were killed, they were buried on the farthest side of the cemetery, and even then, there's a lot of funny things that were happening, and bones were disappearing, graves were disappearing, and it just wasn't a good time for the Chinese in Beaver Falls. And so in 1877, if you can do the math, that's 5 years from when their contract ends. And we see that primarily almost none of the Chinese stay in Beaver Falls. So, the first record we have of Pittsburgh's Chinatown is in 1900. So the last date I had was 1877 to 1900. We don't have that many records, but we can guess that these Chinese that lived in Beaver Falls are migrating to Pittsburgh proper, to the city. So here is a picture of where Pittsburgh's Chinatown used to be. It's in the southeast corner of downtown, and you can see Chinatown Inn. That's still there today, and this is primarily where they moved to. So let's talk about Pittsburgh's Chinatown. So in an article written by the Pittsburgh Press in 1903, it was recorded that 180 people lived in Chinatown with only 3 women recorded in the city. And that's primarily due to because most of the people who were coming into America were laborers, they were men who were sending their money home. The women couldn't come in because of the Exclusion Act, so there just weren't many women around. But by the 1920s, there's almost 500 people living in Chinatown. And at that time, Chinatown was made up of restaurants, laundries was big, grocery stores were big, and this was people's homes. This is where they lived, not only where they worked, but where they found community, and this is where the Chinese would be able to speak their own language, primarily Toisun, and they were able to play mahjong and gamble and drink together, so this was their space. But not so much by choice, because again, it's like the early 1900s. People don't want the Chinese in their space, and so they actually confined the Chinese to this small area, which I showed on the map. And that was the only place they felt welcome. That was the only place that they could be themselves and that they could live freely and not be discriminated or have fear about walking down the street. But even though it was small, Chinatown was organized. Chinatown had mayors. I say that with quotes because they weren't city official elected leaders, but they were leaders of the people, and the people in Chinatown elected these people to be their mayors to represent them. And so the first mayor that we know of Chinatown was William Billy Hung Yacht, or Billy Yacht. And he was elected by the people to be their mayor because he spoke English. And so he was able to communicate with the city officials and tell them the needs of the Chinese, what's going on, being able to represent them in a way that is true to the Chinese. And then we see another mayor, Yun Yi. He did a lot of great work too. He helped the Chinese with their taxes, with citizenship tests, helping them to negotiate legal affairs. But not everything was great in Chinatown all the time. In the 1910s to the 1920s, there was something happening called like the Tong Wars. And Tong, in the way that it's used here, is basically just a Chinese fraternity that served as their bank, as their welfare agency, as their mutual benefit society, as a trade association. It was kind of a catch-all. It was kind of like, you're my buddy, I'm your buddy, we're in this club together. I got your back, you got my back. That's kind of what the Tong was like. And so in Pittsburgh's Chinatown, we actually had 2 Tongs in the city. There was one on 3rd Avenue called Onlyung, which actually my grandpa on my mom's side was the vice president of. I found out like a couple weeks ago. And then there's another one called the Hip Sing Tong, which was on 2nd Avenue. And so they were kind of warring with each other to gain more members, to gain more territory. Yeah, so that's kind of, and you can see in the picture here, these are actually pictures inside the Onlyung, which is still in Chinatown today. So here's a pretty close-up map of Chinatown, and I hope this can orient you with Chinatown in here on the picture. But basically, in all of the research I've done and all the articles I've read, Chinatown has been defined as 3rd Avenue, 2nd Avenue, Grant Street, and Ross Street, which makes this very, very small block. But being able to talk to someone who's lived in Chinatown, I was able to get a little bit more information that the Chinatown actually used to be a lot bigger than that. And the research articles are doing this wrong because it used to be so much bigger. And what happened was, you see the Boulevard of the Allies cuts right through this green box that used to be Chinatown. And so because of the Boulevard of the Allies, the people who were living on this side really started to move away. They said, you know what, our Chinatown's cut in half. Boulevard of the Allies, what does it do? It takes you out of the city. That's what that road does. And so all of these people are starting to leave. Chinatown's getting smaller. And in some ways, these red circles, they are correct. but it used to be so much bigger. And here is another picture of the Boulevard of the Allies being built, which was finished in 1921. So now you guys know a little bit of history and background about Pittsburgh's Chinatown, but what was it like to live in Chinatown? So I invite Mayneen to come and share some stories about what it was like to live and grow up in Pittsburgh's Chinatown.
Life for Chinese begins with a red egg. When you have a new baby, the family, when the baby is a month old, will pass out red eggs to celebrate the new life. So we'll start with a red egg. I'll tell you a little bit about my family. I'm number 3 in a family that has 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. And the 10 of us, which included our parents, shared many things. 10 people shared 1 bathroom. We had 1 room that was an all-purpose room, and then there was another bedroom down the hallway. In the all-purpose room, we had the kitchen, we had the bedroom, we had the living room, the dining room, the study room, the socializing room. So we shared that. We also shared the work, cleaning, both in the places, the 2 rooms that we lived in, and the store, because we lived upstairs from the store called Sun Kwang Yen. Some of the things that we sold in the store, I brought here so you can look and see, and a couple of them are original. So we shared work, we shared food. Because there were 8 children, we seldom got a whole orange or a whole apple. It was always sliced, and you got a slice. And then we also shared clothes. Since I was the oldest girl, I got the new shirt, dress, whatever, passed down to my sister, to my other sister, to the baby sister. So we shared many things. And also, when we were finally able to get a bike, there was 8 kids to share 1 bike. And we took turns riding around the block. The block where we lived was very interesting. It was Chinese, and there were also Caucasian businesses on this block that Lydia outlined here. There were Chinese stores. My father had one of the stores. And then, as Lydia pointed out, he was able to come over because he was not a laborer, but he was a merchant. So he was able to come over, and we're very thankful for that. There was also a gas station on the corner. There was a barber shop. I remember there was a print shop, and I think it was owned by some Slavic company that printed their literature. Around the block was our recreation. You know, we played on the sidewalk, and when the traffic allowed, usually after 5 or 6 o'clock, then we would play out on the street. And then our playground right across the other side of 3rd Avenue was a parking lot, and it was all cinders, but that was our baseball field. Playing football out in the street, the football was a rolled up newspaper that was tied together. That was our football. And around the block we played games that other kids played, like It Tag, 1, 2, 3 Release, and the for the release game was the gas station. If you were caught, you got put in the gas station until someone came to release you. So, and I remember that at that time, they had a truck that came around every so often, and the truck would spray water on both sides of the street to clean it, and we would sit on the side of the sidewalk and get our feet wet when the truck came and sprayed the street. So we had the playground. That was our playground, and that was our neighborhood. The very important part of our block, as far as neighborhood is concerned, there was a place there called the Providence Mission. And Mabel and Mrs. Shaw, who were two loving Christian women, cared about all these Chinese children that were living on this one block. There was my family, Betty's family, Anna's family, Billy Ham's family, and among the families living on this one block were 22 children. So there were plenty of playmates, and we played together, went to school together, and that was our recreation and our life around the block. As far as our education was concerned, you may wonder, well, where did you go to school? What did you learn? Well, at home, our parents were very interested in teaching us the Chinese language and the Chinese culture. And so at home, they would teach us the Toisanese, and when the older ones went to school, some of them had a problem because they did not know enough English to do well in school. And as a matter of fact, my husband, when he went to school way back then, he flunked first grade because he did not know English. And he later made it up. When he graduated from high school, he was valedictorian. And then going on to the next generation, thinking about my son, when he went to school, he was having a problem too. And I remember one day he came home and a paper was marked a lot of X's wrong. And I thought, I looked at the paper, and the problem on this paper was that he was supposed to mark all the articles, the pictures that started with a D. And there was a dustpan. Well, at home, we didn't call it a dustpan. We called it a chum, and so he missed. And that was a problem. So I went to the school, and I talked to the counselor. I said, it is confusing to him to have English and Chinese. Should I continue teaching Chinese at home? And she said, yes, please preserve your heritage. And then in time, he will learn. Encourage him to learn English too, but please keep your language. And as my other children, we tried to get them to learn Chinese, not much interest. Just as my parents tried to teach us, not too much English. Well, not too much interest in learning, but there was hope, because when some of them got to college, they realized the value of learning Chinese, and they took it up in college voluntarily. So there was hope. I know that the Jewish people have like 3 Hebrew schools here in Squirrel Hill, because you too want your children to know the language and the culture. That is very important. I hope that you continue to do that. And if they, like our children, don't like it so much now, later, they will appreciate it. And And speaking about school, we went to Forbes School, that was the elementary school, and I have a picture of it over on the table there. It is torn down now, but over on the left you will see a picture of my future husband. Went to Forbes School over there. And then concerning high school, that was where I got more of the American culture. My first time to taste mashed potatoes was when we went to high school. High school then was called high school, but we started in 7th grade. And so my horizons expanded. Instead of rice all the time, there was something called mashed potatoes, and that was new. Another thing in high school, that instead of playing football out on the street, the boys could now join the football team, and there were 2 from Chinatown that joined a football team. And believe it or not, I think that, somebody up there is a cheerleader. So that was part of our high school experience. One teacher that really impressed me in high school was my English teacher. And she was a challenge, and I did not appreciate her when I was in school, but afterwards I did. Because one day we came to class and she said, now we'll do the homework. And I said, you didn't give us homework. And everybody in the class agreed, you did not give us homework that day. So she sat there and she said, if I did not give you homework, didn't give you an assignment, you asked me for it. And I'm thinking, who is going to ask for this? And she also taught us to memorize. And one student said, wow, we might as well memorize the whole book. And she said, my dear boy, whole books have been memorized. So I remember one thing that she that she made us memorize from Shakespeare. And it goes, out, out, brief candle, life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his time on the stage, and then is heard no more. It is like a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So, Miss Crawford, when I get to heaven, I'm going to thank her because she really challenged us to learn. And then concerning, oops, there's one. I have some articles here because my father had the store in Chinatown, and he sold some of these things. We're talking about education. If you want to see one of the books that were used when we were trying to learn English, you can look at it. And if you look at the back, some of you may know the name that is scratched on the back. Okay, we were talking about people coming to the store. When they had a laundry, they could close on Sundays, and they would come to the store to shop. And while the husband would be shopping or downstairs, he could also be chatting with the other people that came. And then also they would go to the second room and they would play with something like dominoes, and they would have fun doing that as, and sometimes it was used for gambling too. And this was from the original Sun Kwong Yen store. There were other things that we sold in the store. This is fungus, which is not usually used by most people here. Something called the sea cucumber. And this is original. When my mom used to make it, you had to soak it like 3 days before it was soft enough to cut up and to cook. And there are other things here that we sold. This you will find in a Chinese restaurant for using the wok. Apron, so apron for the cooks. And then this is an instrument that we use for pulling the chicken hairs, because when we went to buy like chicken, they wanted it fresh, and so we would go to the store to buy it fresh, and it would be clucking all the ways home. And after we prepare it, this was help to pull out some of the feathers. Well, anyways, there's other things here that we sold in the store that you're welcome to look at. And there are some other pictures over there about Chinatown that if you're interested, you can go over there and take a look. So, anyways, I started with Chinatown, and I left Chinatown after I finished school, married Bill, but Chinatown has wonderful memories for me. And there was something else that we sold, and this is incense in here. And this incense is often used burned to respect people that have moved on. And I just started with the red egg, where life for me began in Chinatown. And when I left Chinatown, it kind of reminded me of the incense, that life goes on beyond Chinatown. And I thank God for the wonderful life that we shared in Chinatown, and there is life beyond Chinatown. And I thank God that this year I was blessed with number 3 great-grandchild. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Union. I hope you get a little bit of a picture of what Chinatown was like. Next I'm actually just going to show the documentary I was able to make with the University of Pittsburgh. This really came out of the increase in hate crimes and being a Chinese American in the city, and what am I going to do? Do I feel safe walking down the street? Do other students at my university care? And so I actually was able to meet up with the dean and the chancellor of the Office of Medicine at the University of Pittsburgh, and he heard my story, and I guess I can give you guys the backstory because they're not here. But there was other students who were at this forum with me, and it was for Asian Americans at the university to talk about their experience living as a Chinese American in the city. And a lot of them were complaining that Pittsburgh is not cool enough, that we don't have all the new stores and the new restaurants, and being a 4th generation Pittsburgher and having my family live here for 100 years, I have a lot of Pittsburgh pride, and I was not allowed to let them bash on Pittsburgh like that. And so I told them a little bit of my story, that my grandma, there used to be a Chinatown in Pittsburgh, my grandma lived there, and the dean heard it and said, "That's great, Lydia. I would be more than happy to fund your project. Let's get started right away. I'll have my secretary email you." And I said, I'm in school for occupational therapy in the School of Health and Rehab Sciences. I'm not a film major by any means, nor am I looking for any project. And he said, "Oh, no, it's fine. I'll just, let me talk to my secretary and I'll get the money over to you." And I was like, oh, well, if you're going to give me some money, let me drop my email in the chat. So that's kind of how this project came about, and just a big shout out to Pitt for hearing my story, wanting to fund my project. And what better way to see Chinatown than some actual footage from the 1960s that my family had. So if you'll just give me 1 minute, I have to set up the video. I hope it will work. But yeah, thank you so much for watching.
During a town.
Sorry, give me 1 second.
During a town hall meeting when we were discussing the recent attacks on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, Lydia Ott, one of our graduate students in occupational therapy, shared with us her family story.
She is a Pittsburgh native, as were her parents, as were her grandparents, and as a matter of fact, her grandmother grew up in what was Pittsburgh's Chinatown.
It gave us the ability to tell a story that really a lot of people had no idea ever existed.
Appreciating the diversity and the complexity of our society in Pittsburgh is very critical to not only be inclusive, but really celebrate the full fabric of the city, full fabric of our university, and give that vision to the next generation.
When you are interacting with a patient, you need to know the context from which their lives come, because that is important as you try to treat them.
If you don't understand where people live and how they live, I think it's difficult to provide comprehensive care.
I think it's important for us to know each other. What I always say is that we can't hate each other close up.
It makes a huge difference, I think, if people know that they are appreciated where they learn and where they work.
Your story is important. Your culture is important to us. We want to hear about it. We want to share it. We want to celebrate it with you. And that's what makes Pitt and Pittsburgh such a rich environment.
Hi, my name is Lydia Ott. I'm in my second year of the doctorate program of occupational therapy at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm a 4th generation Pittsburgher. Pittsburgh is home. Pitt is home, and in the rise of hate crimes against Asian Americans, I think it's really important that we know the history of our city. People don't know that there was ever a Chinatown in Pittsburgh, and it's really important to me because my grandma grew up there.
My name is Lydia Lee Ott. I grew up in Chinatown in Pittsburgh at 510 3rd Avenue, and I lived there until I got married and graduated from Pitt in nursing. 510 3rd Avenue. In this place used to be the building where I and the rest of my siblings were born. Chinatown, at the time when I was growing up, was just one block downtown. 2nd Avenue, 3rd Avenue, bounded by Grant Street and Ross Street, and that was Chinatown. So it's small space, but there's a lot of people. On Sundays, there would be people, like the laundries would close, and then they would have to come to Chinatown to buy things or just to socialize. So then the streets would be crowded. At that time, there were a lot of stores around the block, and there were some restaurants. Chinese at that time did laundry work and restaurant work because there was discrimination, and they would open their own business because nobody would hire them. They did what they could. And San Kuang Yin, the store where my father was now the owner, was on 3rd Avenue, right across from Grand Street. And it was a general merchandise store. And it sold things that Chinese would use that you would not find in a supermarket at that time. Our family did everything. So we were able to because there were a lot of children and everybody pitched in to do the work.
It was really necessary in the 1900s for people to have a place to go where they could have a job, where they could live, where they could feel supported, and have people who spoke their language. It's not only the story of my family and the story of generations of Chinese Americans living in the city, but it's a story of Pittsburgh.
Now this is where the Providence Mission was, where we had the Sunday school. Mrs. Shaw and her daughter Mabel Velsky, not only did they teach us about God, but they taught the older people, like my parents and that generation. They helped them to learn English. Mabel acted as a social worker because my parents did not know how things worked here. After we moved out of the 2nd Avenue Providence Mission, the Salvation Army building was here on this block. We could meet in there and have our Sunday school classes in there. Chinatown Inn is the restaurant that is on 3rd Avenue, and that's what you will see if you go to 3rd Avenue in downtown. They still have the, like the pagoda roof.
Really, Chinatown Inn is the last visual piece left in Pittsburgh of what Chinatown used to be.
In 1920, after the Boulevard of the Allies was built, it cut Chinatown in half. Prior to the building of the Boulevard of the Allies, there were maybe blocks and blocks, maybe 4 or 5 blocks all around that had Chinese in it. And so when I was growing up, it was just now reduced to 1 block.
Would you say that the Boulevard of the Allies killed Chinatown?
It certainly divided Chinatown and made people want to move away. So today, if you go to Chinatown, you will not see a whole lot of stores.
And it is sad to know that Chinatown in Pittsburgh is gone, but in a way, even though it is gone, it's not forgotten. Chinatown is important to everyone because it's part of Pittsburgh's history. It's part of who Pittsburgh is as a city, and it's really important for me as an Asian American to keep telling the story.
Chinatown for me has wonderful memories because in my 89 years, I have seen a lot of change. Lots of Chinese people are still living in Pittsburgh today, and thankfully, they are not confined to the block, 3rd Avenue, 2nd Avenue, Grant, and Ross Street. You know, the people that made up Chinatown are no longer here. I guess I'm hoping that the values and traditions that were practiced in Chinatown will be carried on but that may not be happening. But in a way, traditions are carried on, but in a little different form.
And even though Chinatown is gone, there are parts of Chinatown that live on in different parts of the city. Various regions of our city have just the essence of Chinatown, the community, the stores, the culture, and the language. If you look around in Pittsburgh, it's here.
I'm thinking, in a lot of other cities, there is still a Chinatown. I think there was a need for Chinatown, a physical place where Chinese would feel at home. But that is not necessary now.
Even though in Pittsburgh we don't have that Chinatown, I think we still really need that space to be seen and heard and to grow as a community, not just as Chinese people, but as Chinese Americans, as Asian Americans, balancing both parts of our culture of being Asian, but also being American. It's really important as we train here at the University of Pittsburgh to be the best practitioner that we can be, to see the people in our city that aren't being seen. We need to be equipped as practitioners to be able to deal with that and to treat them with the needs that they have presented. The OCA, the Organization of Chinese Americans, put on a free clinic for Chinese Americans to receive healthcare services from other Asian Americans. I think this was really helpful to the Chinese population in particular because, one, it was free, and two, it was important for people in our community to be able to be treated by people who look like them, who can speak their language. It was also great to help serve the underserved population of people who might not have healthcare services, and so it was just a way for us to help bridge that gap. It was really special to be part of the OCA clinic. It brought our city together, it brought people from all different walks of life to work together for a common goal, to help Chinese Americans get the healthcare and the services that they need. We have really diverse populations here that need to be treated, that need to be seen, that have to have their voices heard. That makes Pittsburgh what it is, that makes Pittsburgh really special, that we are a community and a city of different people, different languages, different things, but that we all are still working together to make Pittsburgh as great as it can be. Okay, thanks so much for bearing with me. I just have a little bit more to get through. I hope that you have understood and learned something new about Pittsburgh, about Chinese and American, about what it was like to live in Pittsburgh's Chinatown. But from the video and from our talks, there isn't a Chinatown in Pittsburgh anymore. So what happens next? Is it still here? As you heard me in the video, I still believe it's here. Yeah, I have a whole slide about that. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is actually the Homewood Cemetery. It's not located in Squirrel Hill. It's in Point Breeze. But if you ever drive through Homewood Cemetery, there is a whole plot of land in Section 3 that is dedicated just to Chinese. And this was brought about actually in 1901 by the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association. And around 250 Chinese Americans are buried there. My Yaya, my Yinyan's husband, is buried there. My Yinyan has a plot, hopefully not anytime soon that she goes to be there. But there's so many Chinese that are actually buried, and you can see, I don't know how well you can see from the picture, but a lot of the headstones are written in Chinese. There's actually no English on a lot of them. And yes, beat me to the punch, Forbes and Murray. I did a little bit of research today on Google Maps, zooming in and out, counting the amount of Chinese and Taiwanese restaurants, supermarkets, fashion boutiques, bakeries, tea shops that exist on Forbes and Murray. And I counted about 15. I may have missed a couple. But there's, you know, Everyday Noodle. This is actually a picture of Everyday Noodle located right on Forbes. Pink Box, Kung Fu Tea, and
Panda Supermarket.
Yep, Panda Supermarket. We can keep going. But in the whole street of Forbes and Murray, there's actually over 30 Pan-Asian specialty restaurants, bakeries, tea shops, supermarkets, all these kinds of things that are located right here in Squirrel Hill. And this is the last thing I'm going to talk about, but does anyone know what building this is? Yes.
What is it? What?
This is Taylor Alderdice High School, located right on Forward and Shady. Yeah. But did you know when the school is closed on the weekends, the Pittsburgh Chinese School actually meets there on Sundays, and they have over 46 different classes that they offer on Sunday, just on Sundays alone. And they're there teaching culture, athletics, they do Chinese classes, where they will learn Mandarin or Cantonese, whatever it might be. And this is just a picture from 2019 of some of the students who went through the Pittsburgh Chinese School that is located right here in Squirrel Hill at Alderdice on Sundays. So just to wrap it up, thank you so much for coming. It has been such a privilege to be able to speak with you, to be able to talk with you, to be able to present the story of Pittsburgh's Chinatown and represent Chinese Americans living here in the city in Squirrel Hill. We are neighbors. Stop by my house anytime. But thank you so, so much for being here.
I have sort of a nice story.
Sure.
Now, I'm not sure whether it was your grandmother's...
I'm not sure.
Sorry, your grandmother's relatives. My husband was a veterinarian on the Boulevard of the Allies, the dreaded Boulevard of the Allies. And he had a Chinese client from the 3rd Avenue restaurant. Now, was that Mr. Lee or Yi? I'm not sure. I think it was Lee. And every time they would bring the dog, he would bring some Chinese food for my husband. I mean, he was so generous and so nice. Of course, that food never made it back to my house. But they were just very generous. And I live right at the corner of Forbes and Murray. We love the Chinese. I love them on the bus. And I'm always forever making this mistake. If I see a Chinese person, we're talking while riding the bus, and what country are you from, what part of China? And she would say Boston.
Thank you so much for sharing. We're just going to move into a time of Q&A. I put a lot of time and effort into these slides, so if you would like a copy of the slides, I would be more than happy to give them to you. And I don't have time to cover everything, but I just put it in the slides from additional resources, some things that I found while I was researching that if you would love to learn more, these are some really great things that I found that you can learn more from too. And then everything is referenced in my slides. But we're just going to open up for a Q&A for either me or for my grandma. We'd be more than happy to answer any questions you guys have. Yeah, Todd.
Do either of you know about any Chinese-owned businesses in Squirrel Hill and other East End neighborhoods during the time that Chinatown existed?
I wasn't alive, so I'll let you answer.
Could you repeat it?
Were there any Chinese-owned businesses in Squirrel Hill
Yes,
during your youth that you
There was
remember?
a Chinese laundry right on Murray Avenue, I remember that. near Beacon.
I really don't know about Chinese laundries. The ones that I'm familiar with were the hand laundries. Now everything is all automatic.
He was asking if
But
there
I
were any
think this was a
businesses in
hand
Squirrel Hill during like the 1930s, 1940s.
There was a restaurant. The family that had the restaurant was a Chang Kwok family, and we knew the children. I don't know if that restaurant is still running or not.
I'm wondering if people came into Chinatown to buy at your father's store, or did he serve only Chinese clientele?
Mostly Chinese. The supplies and equipment and merchandise that we sold would be something you probably would not buy in a regular American store.
Except today, we do buy them. My grandchildren, buy all the dried foods and things that are sold at Panda. I mean, I can sort of answer that because I'm almost as old as Grandma here. Kelly Street in Homewood was a very famous Chinese restaurant when I was a kid. It was one of the few. We went to 3rd Avenue, but also Kelly Street. Wonderful family. I don't know what their name was, unfortunately, but it was a family-owned restaurant. There was one on Hazelwood, at the end of Murray Avenue, Hazelwood Avenue, near to Hazelwood, if anybody remembers that. And they were all family.
That was on Kelly Street that moved.
That was actually my
I see,
family's
okay.
Bill owns Tea Mart.
When we first came, her family owned that restaurant.
So it was all family.
Yeah. My mom's side, that was their restaurant.
When did they close it?
1986.
Yes, the Young family had the restaurant on Kelly Street. They had the tea garden.
Correct.
And it moved to Murray Avenue near Hazelwood when we first came to Pittsburgh in the late 1960s.
Yes.
And there's an Oriental store on Forward that has been there for many years. It has all the supplies that my granddaughter loves. That's been there for ages. I don't know what, that must be a family also that owns that.
I don't know about that, but Hannah's grandmother worked at the tea garden, and I also worked there. Most of us did waitering or waitressing when we were going to school.
Toby, one more question?
Well, yeah, not a question, just an observation. That very ugly history that you mentioned at Beaver, not only were they Chinese and then different, but they were scabs. Okay, in other words, they were brought in to replace the workers who were on strike. And in this area, there was nothing worse than that. So they had two things really going against them.
Mm-hmm. So we're very thankful for all the suffering that our forefathers had to go through, and we're living in an age where we're really blessed.
Thank you very much, Lydia, and,
Sorry, just had a quick question.
Ray Bob, go ahead.
I just have one observation also, and that is that, thank God that all these Chinese restaurants and stores have opened up in Squirrel Hill, because it's basically saved our businesses. I've had people actually say to me, how do you let all these Chinese people own business in Squirrel Hill? I say, A, it's not my choice. Yeah, but I didn't say about it. And B, they've saved us. I mean, it's the best thing that's happened. So thank you. Thanks everybody for that.
Thanks, Ray, for the comment. One last question in the back.
Did you know any of the Chinese that lived on Wiley Avenue or in the Lower Hill District?
You did look? Yes.
Did you have any connection with? Did you have any connection with those families, or visit any of the restaurants or anything? Just curious.
Restaurant, I remember.
The kids had to go to Fifth Avenue High
Do
School.
you remember what family it was?
We have some photos in the archives of the old Chinese laundries that were up and down Wiley Avenue, and I wasn't sure if they had any association with Chinatown or not.
I think when I was growing up, all the Chinese knew all the other Chinese in and around Pittsburgh.
Thank you, Lydia and Liddy, for an inspiring evening. I appreciate you coming. And I also am from Tosan too, my family. Okay.
Thank you so much.
We have Mom, it's a present from us. Okay, thank you very much. Jim? What we usually do is put all the chairs away. Everybody who has a chair, please hold your chair up, take it to the back for us. And please take an opportunity to look at all the books that we have on sale from different authors. Thank you very much.
We have all this stuff. Thank you so much.